Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2You Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2you.net/sociology. And there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so my guest for this episode is Paul O'Connor. Paul, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You're coming in from Exeter area, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm currently at the University of Exeter and I'm working in the Sociology, Anthropology and Philosophy department.
Thanks, Paul. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a sociologist at the University of Exeter, but I'm also an Adjunct Assistant Professor in Sociology at Lingnan University in Hong Kong. I've been living in Hong Kong for about 20 years up until 2019, and then I spent a year in Prague. So I've been moving around as an academic. Actually, I'm originally from Devon. I got my PhD in sociology from University in Queensland, in Australia, and there I was researching Muslim youth in Hong Kong. So I'm essentially a sociologist of religion and ethnicity, but much of my research has been focused on skateboarding in recent years, and partly this grew out of a kind of self-reflexive process of continuously researching groups and communities that I wasn't really a part of, and then wishing to sort of turn my research focus towards something much more familiar, closer to home.
And so I'm going to make an educated guess that you're a bit of a skater back in the day and maybe still are. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. I'm 45 now, and I started skateboarding when I was 11. Had a couple of slim years, but just a few. And basically, I spent my life in skateboarding, and it's the kind of touchstone to sort of who I am and my identity in many ways.
We're similar sort of age, actually. So we were probably around the same kind of boom in the sort of mid to late 80s. Is that kind of considered the biggest boom for skateboarding around then?
Well, yeah, there's a whole generation of us, I guess, after Back to the Future came out. We saw Michael J. Fox on a skateboard. Yeah. And then you saw these glorious boards, these big wide boards that came out, and Pal Peralta, the Bones Brigade, that kind of wave, kind of mid to late 80s. And many of us kind of fell by the wayside, but others sort of stuck with it and went through the transformations. Boards got smaller, went more underground. And of course now we're on the crest of a wave with this huge new boom in skateboarding, and it due to debut in the Olympics this year.
Yeah, I saw that. That's amazing, isn't it? I actually grew up near Southsea Skate Park, and I went there a few times and didn't really appreciate it. Now I'm reflective on it. What an honour it was to live near such a skate park, because they weren't everywhere to begin with, were they?
No, and my pilgrimage itself to Southsea was during the Bones Brigade Ban This tour. Got to edge my way into the crowd and take a glimpse of Tony Hawk on the big vert ramp there. Yeah, fantastic. You were very lucky to have that right at your doorstep. Me being from Devon, it was much, much more scarce to be able to get any ramps or bowls or anything like that down here.
And I wondered how much you were saying that tongue-in-cheek. How much influence did Back to the Future have on skateboarding? Because it's one of my favourite films, and that little bit, in the film, people will be aware of it if they've seen it. Was that really kind of one of the catalysts, or is it already big before then? When was that? 85, that sort of time?
Yeah, that was 85.
Yeah.
It was a big catalyst, and it's really quite significant because, you know, I do this sort of sociology of skateboarding, and it's one of those moments where people sort of chart their biography. It's like, well, I saw Michael J. Fox, I saw Back to the Future, and for a lot of people, it was the first time they'd seen skateboarding, you know, on the screen and seen it sort of spectacularized in that way. But certainly this was a kind of boom that took place after the 70s boom and after the boom in the 60s. So, you know, skateboarding's always been going in these kind of ebbs and flows, and it's kind of peaks every now and then. And for our generation, Back to the Future was a big deal. Speak to people who were, you know, maybe 10, 15 years younger than us, and they're going to say, well, it was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. That was a really big deal for me. And yeah, you know, we kind of sometimes say it tongue in cheek or makes it sound like a bit of a joke, but these big media moments when skateboarding does have that kind of impact on land in the mainstream media, those are the moments where you see this kind of huge interest. You know, like people are mesmerized by skateboarding, and they want to try their hand at it or try their feet at it, you know.
Do you know what it was for me as well, Paul? I don't know how true this is for other people as well. I wasn't particularly good on the board, but I enjoyed it. But it was the boards themselves, the artwork, you know, the stickers that you got with them. There was just something about, you know, a black board and then you turn it over and see the artwork on the other side. It's for a lot of people, is it kind of the aesthetics that really appeals to them?
Absolutely. And this is why the debate goes on and on. Is skateboarding a sport? Or is it more than that? Is it an art? Is it a philosophy? Is it a lifestyle? And a lot of people are drawn to that, and rightly so, because if you think about it, when was the last time you saw a tennis racket with skull and crossbones on it, or a rugby ball with, you know, a kind of satirical piece of art? You're not saying that those sports can't have those elements, but there's something about skateboarding which is this visual culture in itself, and it attracts people and people get interested in that. And, you know, for a lot of people, that's the draw. It's not just that it looks cool when you do it. There's a whole lifestyle, there's a whole kind of subcultural identity that goes along with it. It's the fashion, the visuals, the boards, everything, the way it looks is a really big deal.
And you just mentioned as well the big revival, the big comeback. I now live near Brighton Beach, and what's really noticeable from my point of view is when I was skating back in the 80s, it was very much a male teenage thing. I now see much older skaters, in particular, a lot more female skaters as well. Is that something that's recognisable in kind of the new revival?
Yeah, this is an enormous feature of the new revival, and it's really a tremendous thing that's taken place. And there's a few different dynamics that are sort of converging. Why has this happened? Why didn't it happen before? And for a lot of women, you know, they did skate in the 80s. They did skate in the 70s, in the 60s. You know, all of that's been documented. But what we really see through the 80s and the 90s is that they were kind of not included in a lot of the media that was being produced. So the niche skateboard subcultural media. And one of the big engines now for women being included in skateboarding in these really noticeable and big ways is social media. It's given them the opportunity to actually make their own narrative and to include themselves when previously skateboard magazines might not have thought that they were as progressive or perhaps as athletic as some of the male skateboarders. And that's been pushed to the wayside. And thank goodness, because I think a lot of skateboarders, male or female now, will actually recognize that this is where some of the more exciting stuff is happening in terms of the kind of the new edge, the new visuals, the new kind of style. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening now. And it's partly social media, partly the Olympics, and partly just a new sort of politics of gender and sexual identity as well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seemed to be in the 80s, more lads did the skateboarding and roller booting or roller blading for females. But it's interesting that it's much more diverse now. Have you got any other theories as to why that's happened, that it's opened up to a much wider market?
Yeah, I think that, partly I mentioned it's social media, but I think that there's also an element where skateboarding had become more mainstream anyway, and it pushed through that sort of very elitist niche subculture of the 1990s when it was actually very bland in many respects. It was so inward looking. And after Tony Hawk Pro Skater came out, the popularization of skateboard video games, it became much more open. And so I think those processes that began in the early 2000s, we're actually seeing the inheritance of that. And, a lot of women skaters who have been skateboarding for 10, 15 years are now, seasoned veterans. And I can remember Alyssa Steamer and Toy Machine, Welcome to Hell, jump off of a building. And that was 97, 98. So you've got Alexis Sablone in PJ Ladd's Wonderful Horrible Life, again, around 2001. Those people really making a landmark in terms of being in what we would regard as proper professional skateboarding. And this is the inheritance of it.
And you've also done some work interviewing women skateboarders in Hong Kong, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. My research agenda with looking at skateboarding originally began because I wanted to document some skateboarding taking place in Asia. And, I was primed for that experience in Hong Kong. So I was trying to pull out some of the things in the literature, the sociology of skateboarding, where I could flag there were some differences in Hong Kong. And one of the more recent projects I was able to do was looking at women skateboarders in Hong Kong. And certainly that dynamic that we've spoken about, the increasing numbers of women skateboarders, has been visible in Hong Kong and in Hong Kong skate parks for over a decade now. And often, of a weekend, I've been at the skate park and I've been one of two guys, and there's probably about 6 women there skateboarding at the same time. So I recognize that there's kind of a vibrant skateboard culture for women in Hong Kong, and it's supported and it's included. But, I was flagging things in that research which were quite different from some of the narratives and politics of skateboarders, women skateboarders particularly, that I was following in, the United States, North America, and the UK. And those are sort of perceptions about their ability and fear of getting hurt, things like that, which was really interesting. And it was good to contrast with some of the other research that's been out. And there's a lot of sociological research on gender in skateboarding, actually. That's a huge focus, but most of it hasn't been in a Western context.
I was going to ask about that, kind of culturally. In the Asian skateboarding scene, is there very much their own brands, their own boards, their own trainers, or do they often adopt the UK and US styles?
There are obviously in Hong Kong. There's local brands that mainly come either from shops or developed from some of the sort of veteran riders that ride for shops. In Hong Kong, you get some good quality boards, good quality brands. In China, there are also quite a few of those brands. Some of the products, particularly when we talk about the trucks on the skateboards, the axles, they might not be so well manufactured. So, there's a kind of hierarchy with some of these products in terms of what's regarded as a good, legitimate skateboarding product and what is, a little bit more questionable. But you're right. There is a mini industry of Asian skateboarding that's connected to these often global cities and the shops and the teams that they've got surrounding that community.
I'm always interested in kind of the ubiquity of something like Vans. I mean, I remember getting my first pair of Vans probably mid 90s, something like that. But I mean, that is everywhere, isn't it? Vans, you could probably pick them up in most countries in the world.
Yeah. So Vans have got like a global agenda, and they support skateboarders in Hong Kong. They sponsor skateboarders in Hong Kong, in Indonesia, and in Taiwan, in Korea. Talk about Korea. Korea's got a large presence of Vans and Vans team riders. Yeah, so they've been instrumental in sort of supporting and expanding skateboarding. Vans have had this huge revival again, and we were speaking earlier about how there's a growth in women's skateboarding. Well, partly Vans has kind of played into that in an important way, that they're supporting women's skateboarding and that they're producing skateboard videos and supporting competitions and art initiatives and cultural initiatives that work with skateboarders. So they're a big multinational company now, owned by the VF Corporation, and they turn over billions of dollars a year. But they know that keeping a hand in skateboarding and supporting skateboarding is really in their best interests, and they continue to do that. Like the Vans Park series was a great example of that. They would have this global competition across different continents, Asia, South America, North America, Europe, and they would build skate parks everywhere they went, and they were temporary, but it was all free admission. You could come along, watch the skateboarding, which skateboarders really respect and notice. That's one way to keep yourself authentic, or regarded as authentic within the culture, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the beauties, isn't it? That as long as you can afford a board and a set of wheels, then it's kind of a street sport, isn't it? You can do it anywhere, any place, any time. I think that's probably one of the attractions, that it's not an elitist sport.
Well, yeah, and this is where it fits back into the sociology of sport. And what we've seen over the last 30 years is the growth in what people have called, people often call them extreme sports. Popularly, they're more likely to be referred to as action sports, or as sports sociologist Belinda Wheaton refers to them, as lifestyle sports, where there is this kind of fusion between these new activities. They might have specific type of a modern apparatus, and it filters down to them being not confined to a uniform type of competition or a time of play. You can pretty much go outside your front door and get into these things when you want to. So skateboarding is a great example of that. All you need is a skateboard, and you can walk out your front door and you start using it. You don't need a court or a pitch, a particular facility to use it, even though skate parks have become enormously popular. And then, lifestyle sports are also regarded as being something that is part of your identity. They're individualistic, that they are creative, they revolve around an idea of, this kind of stoke you get, this kind of enthusiasm. And they're also sort of connected to that sort of creative process of art and video recording, media documentation at the same time. So that's a huge boom in the transformation of sports. And we see that with parkour, rollerblading, BMX, surfing, snowboarding. And that's really happened in the last 15, 20 years, where we see there's a fall in the number of team sports, particularly like baseball in the US, football, basketball. Those sports are becoming less popular as team-affiliated sports for young people, while lifestyle sports in these different manifestations are rising in popularity and becoming, much more popular and in demand.
Particularly during the pandemic, I guess, as well, when we were restricted, just a short bit of exercise each day, there was a certain amount of freedom to be able to get the board out and go skating, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that individual element. So it's kind of a bit of a contradiction, because they're very much regarded as individual sports, and yet they also seem to be these magnetic kind of activities for creating a culture and a community. So yeah, an interesting sort of something you do on your own, but together.
Yes. Yeah. Well, those of you listening that are in Brighton will know there's a skate park at an area called The Level. I mean, I've never walked past it and seen it quiet. I mean, at any time of the day, it's always absolutely packed. I like what you said about the sort of the recording it as well. You know, I work at a sixth form college where there's quite a lot of skaters, and normally accompany a skater is someone else lying on the floor with a video camera to get the right angle. So it's definitely a sense of community behind it as well.
Yeah, and again, you know, that's why something like skateboarding has been embraced by, you know, school curriculums, because you know, there is a school in Malmo in Sweden, the Brigariat Gymnasium, which is basically a skate park with a school built on top.
Wow.
And the skateboarding operates as a key part of the curriculum because it allows students to access the design and creativity of, you know, creating a social media account or doing business economics, setting up a brand, filming, editing. And, you know, all of those elements are within, you know, these types of sports, because like you say, you know, the artwork is important, the visual identity is important, it's entrepreneurial, it's DIY, and it has a lot of those, you know, this is good and it's bad, but it has a lot of those elements that really government want to nurture in young people, because they want them to be able to do it themselves. You know, part of the neoliberal paradigm is that you got to be self-reliant and independent. And, you know, guess what? If you're prepared to fall off a skateboard every day for a couple of hours, then that gives you the ability to bounce back and weather the caprices of a kind of caustic economic landscape.
Yeah, I was just thinking then, what kind of hit numbers are skaters getting on YouTube for tricks and skills and so on? They must be in their millions.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So the number one social media platform for skateboarding is Instagram, and you know, it does everything. It enables you to share those images and those videos, and you know, there's a lot of skateboarders that have got a few million followers. You know, the really famous characters like Nigel Houston or Sky Brown, for instance. But there's a very healthy amount of skateboarders with, you know, hundreds of thousands of followers that might not be present in skateboarding competitions or might not be particularly famous outside of the subculture, but they're there, you know.
Yeah. I really like the attention to kind of the backdrop, you know, where someone is skating. Even, like I said, locally, people film on Brighton seafront just as the sun's going down. You've got the backdrop behind it. It's beautifully filmed, a lot of the work that people are doing, isn't it?
Yeah. And over the last, you know, certainly over the last 10 years, with the accessibility of really great mobile technology, networked technology, great cameras, great resolution, anyone can do a decent job with filming now. And that's just made it even more appealing and accessible to people, is, you know, how quickly you can document stuff and do a good edit and get it up on your social media platforms within, you know, half an hour.
Yeah, certainly. I remember the old skating videos of the 80s. You had to pay a fair bit of money to get your hands on a videotape of the skateboarding, didn't you?
Yeah, and for us here in the UK, we were always at a time lag, and certainly, I mean, we're talking about the kind of cross-disciplinarity of skills that you get in skateboarding, and as a teenager, that's basically, I'm not an electronics wizard by any means, but I certainly learned how to fix old VHS and Betamax video recorders so I could copy skateboard videos when I was 13, 14 years of age. And I actually learned how a VCR worked. So that kind of stuff was really important, because we were media deprived in that generation. And of course, now we're in an era of media saturation with skateboarding, and it creates a very different vibe within the culture.
It's a good life skill to have that, though, Paul. Good life skill.
Yeah, give me your old Betamax recorder.
There'll be some kids listening going, what on earth is a Betamax?
Yeah, what's a Betamax?
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
The final area that I wanted to talk to you about is two words that you probably wouldn't put together: skateboarding and religion, which is your a recent publication. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks. Originally, when I started to sort of look at skateboarding, I was hugely influenced by Ian Borden's work. And I remember when he published his book on skateboarding space in the city around about 2001, I was in the middle of my PhD and I was thinking, geez, maybe I should have done skateboarding. It never even occurred to me, like, wow, you can actually do an academic study of skateboarding. And I guess that had been in the back of my mind for a while. And when I started to focus on skateboard culture in Hong Kong, what I realized quite quickly was that I was regularly skateboarding with a group of skateboarders who were middle-aged like myself. And most of us were men, but in our late 30s and up to early 50s. And we'd spent our life skateboarding. What was significant is that we all regarded this as particularly meaningful. And in many ways, when everyone was talking, that it was clear that we mapped our lives through skateboarding. And it was kind of impossible to give a narrative or a biography of any one of these men without it relating to some elements of skateboarding, you know, with jobs, relationships, marriages, births, deaths, all of that was in some way connected with riding a board. So this was really relevant to like thinking about identity sociologically, but it was also curious for me as someone that studied the sociology of religion, being interested in those areas. I started to really try and engage with how people thought about skateboarding as being this meaningful thing and what they did in terms of kind of ritual process, or the kind of like the significant little fetishes that they had, or the way that they turned their mind to skateboarding and how it was in some ways analogous to like a spiritual element or a religious element. So what I started to look at was elements of pilgrimage, like the idea of secular pilgrimage, where there were particular places in skateboard culture, you know, like the Brooklyn Banks, or a set of steps in California in a high school called Hollywood High, or a large set of 25 steps in, you know, the French city of Lyon called the Lyon 25, which the skateboarder Jaws ollied down and was on the cover of Thrasher. All of these kind of places start to have their own little history in skateboarding. And it was quite evident that skateboarders were traveling to these locations and just simply to sort of touch the ground and be there, and sometimes to actually skate the places as well. And I thought, if skateboarders are engaged with this element of secular pilgrimage, go into places that other people would just walk past and ignore. So, you know, like rather than someone going to New York and looking at the Statue of Liberty, you get these skateboarders that go to New York, and I'm one of them, and that just searches out the Brooklyn Banks. And I was thinking, well, there's something else there then. And I started to think about, well, what other themes could be connected in skateboard culture to sort of these kind of religious elements. And we already spoke, you and I, about the art on skateboards. And I thought, well, that connects with iconography. And there's a lot of skateboarding art that brings out elements of death and fear and skeletons and like grim reapers and stuff like that. Also the way in which skateboarders are regarded as these kind of superhuman gods and folk heroes. And yeah, I started to play around with that, and also looked at the ways in which organized religion, like Christianity, evangelical Christianity, or even Islam in countries like Indonesia, work with skateboarding to sort of promote religion to youth culture, and, you know, particularly because there's concerns that skateboarding might be a bad influence. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I looked at sort of these kind of small skateboard cults where people were making their own quasi kind of religion. I don't know if you've ever come across it, but there's a group called Barrier Cult that have this particular kind of ritual of only skating in balaclavas to protect their anonymity. And, it's a really interesting group. And they're basically parodying religion, but in a political way, because they don't like the way in which skateboarding's become too commercial and celebrity focused. So that's really interesting. And like, another element that I look at in the book towards the end of the book is how a lot of skateboarders will say this phrase, skateboarding saved my life. And look at how skateboarding has been a resource. And again, it's analogous to the pandemic, how people have, flooded to skateboarding as a way to get out and get some sanity and get some, kind of mental health by going out and doing some exercise. But yeah, for a lot of people, this idea that skateboarding saved my life is another way in which we can sort of draw some kind of comparisons between kind of philosophy and a kind of spiritual element to what's going on in skateboarding.
Yeah. So it becomes a way of life as such.
Absolutely. And, I kind of frame this, talking about the idea of lifestyle sports, I kind of frame it as a lifestyle religion. And skateboarders, I did this actually very provocatively, because skateboarders don't tend to like religion. There is that element that anything that's too organized or too ordered is a constraint on their freedom and creativity. That they're pushing against rules, they're pushing against being policed. They want freedom in the urban space, they want freedom of thought as well. But in many ways, and I'm a skateboarder myself, so I say this knowing I'm critiquing myself at the same time. For all the progression and creativity in skateboarding, skateboarders are also rather conservative. And what I mean by that is that they want to protect their beautiful, special culture. They recognize that there's something valuable in it, and they're very cautious of outside forces that will damage that in any way. Yeah. So when you look at what's going on in skateboarding now, especially for older skateboarders like myself, there is this huge anxiety about what the Olympics might do to skateboarding. And what we see is this tendency for skateboarders to make skateboarding even more special, to talk about it, to refer to going to the skate park as, I'm going to church or I'm going to worship. And you see this manifest in a way that, like I had a friend that died in Hong Kong, someone that we skate with, and at his funeral, he had 2 skateboards there at his casket. That's how he kind of documented his life. That's how he kind of reinfused a kind of religious life identity with skateboarding. And you see that many times, that people will document these big life events, their marriage, having their wedding photos with the skateboards, or, like any other event that sort of takes place, these rites of passage, celebrate Christmas, have to have a Christmas skate, things like that. Yeah. And so basically this is what I did in this book. I went through issues of myth, iconography, pilgrimage, looking at communitas and video, and really kind of get into the heart of the different ritual elements, and just documented as much of this unique kind of behavior as I could. And the thing that was really enjoyable about it is that I was able to draw on international group of skateboarders, and some of it was done ethnographically, some of it was done online with interviews, and it just got many different perspectives, across the globe on how skateboarding is so important and meaningful to people.
That's amazing. And I'm intrigued now to go back to the first point you made about the pilgrimages. What's the Mecca, if you like? What's the ultimate place to film or to practice skateboarding? Is there a particular area which is recognized as the number one?
This is going to be a controversial thing to say. It's rather contested. With now over 20 plus years of skateboard videos, there's a great book that's come out recently by an Australian urban sociologist called Duncan McDewey-Ra, and he looks at Asian skateboard sites through video, and he makes a point, that this is the legacy of over 20 years of filming Asian or global cities really below the knee. And there's something unique about what skateboarding, this archive of video that we've got in skateboarding, is that it's documenting these cities and these kind of nodes of development from a particular angle just below the knee as skateboarders follow each other around holding the camera at this low height to capture tricks. So in recent years, somewhere like China with all of the cities that have had enormous development, like Shenzhen, like the Shenzhen wave, is an iconic place to go skateboarding, but it's actually got, a very recent history. You're only talking about 15 years. And then you've got Wallenberg, the set of 4 steps in San Francisco in a high school, which has got like 30 years of history, if not more. And these are regarded as iconic places. And in skateboarding, you are almost required to remember who did what trick down these steps. So it becomes really significant. And people do travel to these places to just be in the presence of them. And what's also significant is that a lot of places have disappeared. So there's a place, again, in San Francisco called the Hubba Hideout. And, this phrase hubba is something that we attach with skateboarding. And a hubba is basically like a concrete handrail that you can grind or slide on. But the word itself, hubba, comes from street slang for crack cocaine, because this area, the Hubba Hideout, was an area that people would deal drugs. It's since been, rendered unskateable, but this is a really kind of big, important place, and people will go there and they'll chip off a piece of concrete and take it home with them, because then they've got it. It's not only have they visited this place, not only have they performed their pilgrimage, but they've taken a souvenir or a memento. So there's a lot of these different places. And what's so fascinating is that many of the really important ones become demolished or unusable, or someone builds something on top of them. The campaign to save South Bank in London is a great example. That's an iconic place, and it's still living and breathing. And it's a place that many skateboarders want to go worldwide. So that's like a touchstone, certainly speaking from, the UK perspective. South Bank, if you've gone to South Bank as a skateboarder, you've basically fulfilled a rite of passage. That you've had to have done that at some stage, and you had to skate there at some stage. So yeah, there's so many, and every place has got, you can even whittle it down, as I found, to sort of small towns, and they've got like their one important spot that everyone used, and then it got, torn down or something like that. And of course, that also relates to the big issue with DIY spots now that you get in skateboarding, where people take out bags of concrete, mix it, and make their own little transitions and curbs in overlooked, unloved places in their local town or city. So a pilgrimage spot in skateboarding can be anything from a curb to, a set of steps in a big office complex, to a DIY piece of concrete in, a car park that no one visits anymore.
Maybe once we release this episode, we should put that on Twitter, see what other people think. Let them join in the debate, see if they've got a number one. That would be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul. I always ask people to let the listeners know if they want to find out more or read your book. How can they find out a little bit more about your details you've given?
Yeah, well, certainly, the book is out there. You're welcome to find the book. I believe it's available on all the major sites. I also think it's going to be released accessible at a decent price on one of the skateboarding online stores, the Palomino, which stocks a lot of skateboarding magazines and books. So check that out. But I also regularly blog on sort of issues relating to skateboarding and religion. I keep like a running document, a living document of some of the interesting things that I find. So you can check that out on my blog, Everyday Hybridity. I also have an Instagram account where I also share amusing elements of skateboarding and religion. and that is called Skateboarding and Religion. You can just find that, and it's basically like sacred skateboarding, and you'll see lots of amusing elements there where it's undeniable that there is this kind of religious and spiritual element in skateboarding and how people mark it as special and important. So yeah, have a look at some of those and you'll get much more information.
Great. I can include the links in the synopsis for the podcast as well. But,
sure.
Thank you so much for your time today, Paul. And, a really, really interesting area. I know that a lot of my students are skaters, so they'll be listening with a certain amount of enthusiasm, definitely, to this episode.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm really pleased. And let me know if you ever want to do anything else in skateboarding, sociology of skateboarding, and lifestyle religion. I've got a lot of colleagues who'd be happy to speak to you as well.
I will take you up on that offer. Thanks again, Paul, and thank you very much for your time.
All right. Cheers then. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.